According to Forbes, in 2023, 60% of U.S. workers reported covering or hiding some part of their true selves at work in the last 12 months. And 63% of them said that they started that even before they began that job. That's a lot of energy that folks are investing in hiding themselves or their true selves from their colleagues, leaders, and in some cases, friends at work.
Yeah, exactly. This is Queer Money episode number 544, and today we're joined by LinkedIn's career expert, Andrew McCaskill. Andrew shares the results of a recent LinkedIn survey on being out at work, and then shares several tips for rocking your pride at that job.
Yeah. Andrew has had successful careers in places like Nielsen, SiriusXM, Facebook, and more. He is the creator and contributor to LinkedIn's Black Guy in Marketing email series and has been featured on Essence, CNBC, Grindr's Into, and more.
So let's hear what Andrew has to say about successfully being gay at work.
The mission of Queer Money is to financially empower the LGBTQ plus community. Join us in thanking Capital One for supporting that mission.
Welcome, Andrew McCaskill from LinkedIn to the Queer Money Podcast. We're looking forward to a meaty discussion on being out at work.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We're excited to have this good discussion. You recently published some data and created a guide for more LGBTQ plus professionals to be comfortable and ways to come out at work. But we want to dive into some of the data specifically first. A recent study that you came up with found that 35% of queer professionals feel safe bringing their full selves at work. That seems abysmally low when you can think about all the DE&I efforts that have taken place over the last several years. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, I think one of the reasons why we really wanted to do this survey is in my previous life, I was at Nielsen and, we owned Harris Poll. And one of the things that we did with GLAAD every year was we talked about accelerating acceptance. And there was this one data point from years ago that has stuck with me forever. And the numbers were really good about would you go to a coworker's wedding if they were marrying, someone of the same sex. And the number for people who said yes, they'd go to their coworker's wedding was something like 67%. And then the numbers for would you take your child to a coworker's wedding if they were marrying same-sex person, the number was like 7%, right? Wow. And so when I thought about that, when we were talking about like, what are we going to do around making sure that we're speaking directly to queer professionals, asking them what they need at work, I was struck by the fact that so much of the data that we see, guys, that comes out, I think forgets about the fact that the sun does not rise in New York and set in LA. Right. There are a lot of professionals out here. There are a lot of us who are queer professionals who do not live in big coastal cities. And I think about that number as being high, but this number includes people in Jacksonville, Florida, and Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and all throughout, sort of the middle of this country. And I think that that number is really low, but I think it's also really accurate because oftentimes we think about these big companies with their D&I programs, and we think about, we have these amazing advocacy groups, right? And we think about the progress that we see on television, and a lot of that progress does not trickle into small town America, right? Where it's not just about coming out at work, whether it's a decision or, you've got all these people saying, come out wherever you are. It's better on the other side. There are a lot of people in parts of the country, and not parts of the world, but parts of these United States that are thinking about not only could this impact my career, but it could impact my safety as well. And so there's a lot of pieces of this that we wanted to, one, acknowledge the reality of queer people's lived experience at work, and not just at big companies and not just in certain cities, but then we also wanted to position it with hey, if this is the reality, let's start to talk about how you manage and solve for some of those things as a queer person, because even the ability to come out at work there's a certain modicum of privilege in that too, because some of us, either how we present or or through other factors of other people outing us, don't have the agency and option to say, oh, I will make a decision to come out on this day or that day too. So
Yeah, those are all really good points. I'm curious, sometimes I get into, I have a confession to make. Sometimes I go into scroll holes on Twitter to see what garbage people are saying. And very often when the topic of coming out at work comes up on Twitter anyway, it's a lot of the comments are, all I care about is whether or not you do a good job at work. Don't bring your sexual orientation. Don't bring sex up at work. What is your response to that? Because I feel like when I read that, I feel like it's probably coming, in many cases, not always, from the center of the country.
yeah, when I read stuff like that, I think that it's crazy because so many people have it misconstrued in their mind that being a part of the LGBTQ plus community is all about sex. They're always thinking about our orientation as below the waist, and so much of our orientation is at the heart and above the neck, right? And so that's something that I think society puts on us, that my being a Black gay man who grew up on a dirt road in Mississippi and who's now lived all over the world, I have a unique perspective that if I did not bring that perspective to work, it would be corporate malpractice for me not to bring that authenticity to work. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not a believer in bringing your whole self to work. LinkedIn and Microsoft does not need 3 a.m. and a Ibiza me or bottomless mimosa me at work every day. But
I don't know. It could be kind of fun.
he's a good time. He's shirtless, but he's a good time. But what they do need is my authenticity, because our differences really are assets when we are at work. And so anybody who says, don't bring your blah, blah, blah to work, or don't bring your Blackness to work, or your Latina to work, or your queerness to work, our lived experiences, our differences are assets. Queer people bring what the most recent number I've seen is like $1.4 trillion that we add to the US economy. And so when I think about that, for any company that is trying to say, how do I engage this consumer base with authenticity in ways that says that this store, this product, we're a safe place for you. You don't get to that without having someone inside of your company help you decode culture and help you decode how to do that effectively, right? And so I think that the problem with that is that you're saying, well, don't bring your orientation to work with you every day. I know plenty of heterosexual people who are smarter about work because their parents, or who are smarter about work because, or whatever they have to do that day, because they've been a caregiver for a parent before, or they're smarter about work because they've had a lived experience that's different from the person sitting next to them. And that's what our companies need now more than ever, is to better understand culture and to get to differentiated opinions and perspectives so that they can solve problems differently.
Yeah, yeah. When I hear that, I hear people say, "Don't bring your sexual orientation to work," I often think it's dripping with straight privilege, because I don't think straight people acknowledge how much they bring their straightness to work. Just off the cuff comments like my opposite sex spouse and I went to dinner last night, or our kid but just had lost their tooth. Like they bring it. They have their desk, their picture of their spouse on their desk, and it's like, I don't think you understand how much you bring your straightness to work. And we're not asking to like show up in a jock strap and disco boots. We're just asking to just be honest about who we are. I don't know where I came up with that
imagery
outfit.
that's going on in all of our heads.
He
as we're
came up with
listening
that
to this
outfit from my
podcast.
Ibiza comment.
Probably.
Yeah.
You had something?
But you're
Yeah,
right. Our work environments are teeming with heterosexuality, right? Like it's at every water cooler, there's going to be a conversation of some sort for most of us about what my husband does for work, or what my wife does for a living, or what happened to me in carpool with the kids, or my mother-in-law is coming to town, or like, I'm so mad the guy that I'm dating did X. And and I think that what people don't understand is that, one comment from the one gay guy says like, my boyfriend and I broke up, and like, oh, why are the gays bringing this to work? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
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 You guys do it
Exactly.
all the time.
Yeah. You know, I also appreciate that you touched on something that I think a lot of folks in our community forget, that more often than not, when we see initiatives from the from corporations to show up at Pride, to sponsor a conference, to get out into the community and do work, that is never, I'll tell you this, I don't think that there has ever been a case where that was was suggested by a straight white man in leadership. It always is coming from a queer person who wants that company. They want their company to show up authentically for the community. Now, how that ends up departing through marketing routes or through community decision makers routes, it can definitely change it. But if we don't show up authentically to work, then it's harder for those people to say, yes, I want to support what your community is doing culturally, or what your community needs financially, or what your community needs us to do product wise. If they don't completely understand it because we're not showing up as our true selves, then it's going to be harder for them to serve. Right? It's just like, you putting in a pizza order and saying, I want a pizza, and then somebody gives you a pizza and you're like, that's not the pizza I wanted.
that's not the one
Like,
I
well, you
wanted.
didn't tell me what you wanted on it, right? So as a
Right.
community, we need to be cluing into our companies.
We have to do a timeout. Are you saying you want to have pizzas for dinner tonight?
No, I'm not.
All right.
I think what you're saying is so spot on, because, and the thing that people ask me a lot about, what can companies do, and I have a lot of opinions about that. But I think for corporations too, that coming out is a journey for everybody, right? And I think coming out for companies is also a journey. I think that there's like this sort of supporting LGBTQ plus employees 1.0 was like, oh, well, we're going to make sure that we have safe spaces and ERGs and things like that. And we're going to employee resource groups, or, we're going to go to the Pride Parade, right? Or we're going to do all these things in June. And I think that that's 1.0. But, gay people are gay all year long, not just in June.
We exist 365.
We need support all year long, not just in June. And so I think that is that we get the opportunity to sort of help our companies along their journey as coming out as supportive of their employees and the community, right? And so that is a journey that we help them on all the time. It's like, okay, this was great that we did something for Pride, but what are we doing to support employees all year long? How do we get to the next level and the next evolution of that journey? And I think about the data that we have in this particular study, and what I think so much of it is, it could be really confusing to people when they hear like, oh, that many people don't feel comfortable being out at work. But like, a Black trans woman won an Emmy or was up for an Emmy, or there's all of this representation that we now see on television and in movies, and we've got Pete Buttigieg, and he's in the presidential cabinet. And so, what do you mean you don't feel comfortable coming out at work? And so there's this dichotomy that's happening in our beautiful country right now, where you've got, last year there were 500 plus pieces of 500 plus bills that went through state legislatures that are grossly anti-LGBTQ plus, right? Grossly. And so we're thinking about, we've got these two things that are happening at the same time. And for many people who are thinking about either coming out at work, or being or maybe even participating more in LGBTQ plus activities, if they do have those opportunities at work, they're thinking, man, I don't know who's like the team that's like, watching Pose and cheering them on, or who's the team that's like, calling their state senator to say, pass that, don't say gay. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's so much of there's a bit of real fear for a lot of us in terms of that. And what we wanted to do with the study was like, okay, well, we have this study with this data. Okay, now that we've sort of acknowledged the lived experience, what can we do about it? How can we couple this data with real advice to help LGBTQ plus folks and queer professionals to, okay, if we can't change, these companies and the systems, what we can do is give you the best possible information so that you can then create a strategy so that you don't have to deal with as many of these roadblocks as possible. This is not going to end homophobia at work. But what it can do, we felt like, is give you information. And I feel like information gives you options, options give you agency. And what we wanted to do was to empower queer professionals, no matter where they are on their journey of being out at work. It's like, okay, here's some technology tools that we know technology helps democratize information and access. And we can help you figure out how to make a better decision about where to go and take your talents to, right?
Right.
And then let's think about some other things that are like, okay, here's how you say, so much of the data said that the environment was causing anxiety and burnout for queer professionals. And I absolutely understand that. I know how I felt as a Black man during all of the police shootings that were happening all over the country, right? I know what it did to me in terms of just getting up to go to work every day, right?
Mhm.
Or and so what we wanted to do was say, okay, part of that is let's help you with that too, right? Like there's like, here's how to talk to HR about, is there support, like how to look at your healthcare packages to see if there's mental health support, how to ask for it and who to ask for it, and who's like guaranteed to be discreet about the question that you're asking, right? And how do you build professional community no matter where you are on that journey to also help support you in that? Because so much of, I like to say that building great careers is a team sport. Nobody builds a great career solo. And
Right.
so, how do you figure out how to build that sort of professional community? And if you are in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and you're not out, how can you use technology to take geography off the table? Here are
Mhm.
all of these incredible LGBTQ plus leaders and voices that you can follow and that you can engage with. Here are these great newsletters if you want that, so you can get more information. Like we wanted to open up the aperture for people to start to say, even if I can't see myself at work, I can see myself in my career and in the professional world because it's so much bigger than this company where I am right now or even the city that I live in.
Right. That's a lot of hope.
Yeah, definitely. I think that one of the questions I think that a lot of folks have is, what value is it to the company to support this kind of thing? What does it mean to the company if we are stressed, or we have burnout, or we are feeling anxious about our place of work, or, as you mentioned, we're feeling stressed and anxious about what's going on in society outside of work.
Yeah.
How do companies deal with that, or how do they understand the impact that they can have on individuals and their
Yeah,
bottom
I
line?
think I think for companies, a lot of it is a journey. One, there's some companies that just want to be on the right side of history, and you can tell how they show up. Like you can look at, I love to go through the list of like Human Rights Campaign's Equality Index, right? Because HRC holds a high bar to get that 100 score. I've worked at companies that have gotten the 100 score, and the requirements change every year, right? So it's not like just a check the box. And so you know, there will always be people who will challenge the impact of diversity and inclusion on the bottom line. There will always be people who will try to sort of challenge that science that or challenge that data that we've seen year over year. But I also think that the benefit to companies is when people can show up and be their authentic selves and not have to deal with that lack of psychological safety, or to feel like that something other than their hard work is going to determine their career progression. Those employees who have that sense of belonging will show up better, and they will have a differentiated level of loyalty to the company, and they will also bring you innovation and ideas. When we talked about code switching, assimilation is exhausting, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it
Right.
leaves almost no time for creativity and innovation. And those, again, are the things that these companies need from us most. I think we're also going to enter into a space where companies that do not show up for communities of color and that do not show up for their LGBTQ plus employees in meaningful ways, if that, I think we're going to enter a space to where employees, I will say this, employees and consumers have more voice and more choice than they've ever had before.
Mhm.
Yes.
If companies are supporting this anti-LGBTQ plus legislation, or being deafeningly silent on some of those things, you will see employees begin to vote with their feet, and you will see LGBTQ plus consumers begin to vote with their dollars, right? And I think that that's important. I think it's also important that as companies are thinking about our productivity and having happier and more high impact employees, to actually being on the right side of history with our consumer base, right? But there's also going to be a moment where hopefully we begin to see more LGBTQ plus folks ascending to leadership. I look at, like, the some of the the articles and things like that, where you have more people that are taking their talents to companies where they can thrive, and you see that queer people are excelling in leadership roles. And there's going to be a bunch of companies that are going to want to have those leaders in their organizations, and they're not going to get them if they're shitty to gay people.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. How do you think it affects an employee, a queer employee who maybe is not out, or who is um, thinking about working for a company, or has just started working for a company, when they find out that there is somebody at the C or E suite level who is an out individual? And along with that, do you think that we as individuals have a responsibility to those who are coming up behind us to be out?
I love that question because it's a hard one, right?
Yeah.
I'll answer the first part. I think that when it comes to consumers and employees, we want to see ourselves, and we want to see ourselves, and we want to like the way we see ourselves. If I'm going to a company and the only person of color in leadership is the D&I person, I immediately think that that company has a D&I problem, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I am too talented to go someplace where the stakes may be against me and my skill set, that I would not be able to thrive there, right? And so I think that when you are a queer person, or maybe somebody who's even thinking who is queer and not out, or somebody who's queer and out, regardless, when you see leadership and somebody who's thriving and they're living their authentic lives, you think to yourself, um, if he can do it, I can do it, or if she can do it, I can do it, right?
Right.
And you also have a certain level of pride about, oh, this is a company that this person's sexual orientation did not matter to their ascension, and I
Mhm.
want a piece of that, right?
Yeah.
The flip of it is, coming out for every individual is so personal, right?
Right.
And and I think that even people who code switch, I didn't come out at work until I didn't come out of work until I was in my late 30s. Is when I moved to New York, mid 30s, late 30s. Um, I'll tell you this quick story. Had every intention of coming out at work. I was working for a mid-size firm down south, and it was a family-owned business, and we had an epic Christmas party every year. It was epic, right? And I had started dating this guy, and I was really excited about him, and he was like super cute. And I was like, we're gonna look so good in our tuxes. I was like, I'm gonna come out to the Christmas party. I'm gonna bring him as my date to the Christmas party. And about, a couple, like maybe like 2 weeks before the Christmas party, I was putting this kid up for not this kid, he was in his 20s. I was putting this guy up for promotion. And another leader said, yeah, I don't know if he's client ready. And I was like, he's amazing. I was like, what do you mean he's like? He's like, he's a little, he shows up, he's a little light in the loafers. Now,
Right.
I had never heard anybody say that term before, but I knew exactly what it meant. And I said, oh, I'm having a conversation about somebody's career, and their sexual orientation just became a part of the conversation. What the
Right.
entire, F, right? And I said, oh, I'm not going to come out here. I worked there for another 3 years and did not come out. So, and I said, okay, when I get to New York, I'm going to, boom. I gone to New York, got in this job 3 years later. And I was like, okay, well, do I come out I'm not going to come out like in the recruiting process, like, that's going to be weird. And then I got the offer. I was like, oh, I'm not going to come out I'm not going to come out in the negotiation process. That's even more weird. Now, mind you, I said the day I got to New York, I was going to come out at work, rainbow flag tied around my neck, right? And then so I'm like struggling with this, like, okay. Then it's like first day of work. It's like I'm at orientation. It's like, hi, I'm Drew. I'm queer. And I feel what I realized for me is that authentically, I'm not the rainbow flag tied around my neck person. Authentically for me, my coming out journey was I put a picture of me and the person I was dating on my desk at work. And I let that be, I was kissing him on the cheek, so it was pretty obvious who it was, right? And I let that sort of be my way to enter into the conversation at work.
Mhm.
I tell you that long-winded story just to say that it's so personal and so different for every individual that, yeah, I think I would love to see people come out, but I never know what sort of invisible baggage and backpack other queer people, even highly successful queer people, have and that they're carrying around every day. So I give people a lot of grace either way.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm curious, in hindsight, what you thought that company that you were working for down south missed out on with you being feeling required to hide yourself for 3 more years.
Yeah, I think that there's a modicum of trust and camaraderie that they missed out on. That I think that if I'd felt like that if I'd felt a little bit more like safe to do that, and some of it was probably on me. I mentioned the invisible backpack because that was one person that I based my decision on for 3 years, right? As opposed to saying, okay, I'm not going to judge the entire company by this one person. So there's some of that that's me too, right? So I want to be
Yeah.
clear about that. But I think that there's a ton that was missed out on because I think that when you have that freedom to be sort of authentic and honest about these things, that it also colors how you engage with your employees. It colors how much you ingrain yourself into the culture because you
Mhm.
feel like it's a culture to be ingrained in that will accept you, right? And so I think that there's a piece of that both me and the company missed out on, if I'm honest.
Capital One Auto Navigator does more than just auto financing. We're here to help you find a car you love, too. Shop millions of cars from thousands of dealers nationwide. Research your favorite makes and models. Explore dealers near you and more. All on Auto Navigator.
I really appreciate you sharing that story, in part because, folks, you've heard us talk about cascading homophobia.
Yeah.
And how a decision maker may say no to a queer person when it comes to a promotion or a hire or something like that, because somebody above them is either overtly or conspicuously homophobic. In this case, it was overt, right? I mean, we knew exactly where that person stood, and I appreciate that because a lot of people don't necessarily hear it in a story format and hear it in a real life experience. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember, that when we talk about queer people advancing through corporations and getting to the level where they can be an example for those people coming up behind them, and for those who are wanting to get into the C and E suite positions, they will have dealt with over and over and over again, have dealt with cascading homophobia to get to that level. So I think there's a certain level of respect for individuals who are out, whether they are out because they are truly out or out because it's just who they, it's pretty obvious, in this case, as you brought about or mentioned. I think that then it kind of brings us to this idea of what can we actually do? What are some steps that we can take as queer employees that would help us to advance our careers? You came up with some suggestions, and LinkedIn has brought forth this information that I think a lot of us who are on a career path of wanting to move up can take advantage of.
Yeah. One of the first things I will say is, I say this all the time, is that you're stronger together. And having, I call it professional community. It's not, to me, it's not networking. Is that having a professional community just means that you have a group of people who are rooting for you to win.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why, and I would say this about the LinkedIn platform, even if I didn't get a check on the 1st and 15th, is that I think it's a really great tool. It's a really great tool particularly for people from underrepresented groups to find each other, right? Because it takes geography off the table. Like, you can actually use it to build community and to do that sort of networking. I think because that's one of the major things that I think is really important for us. For one, not just to get, to advance our careers, but we need to have a community of people that we can ask the hard questions, or we need to be information sharing with each other and supporting each other in a completely different way. And that means that, if somebody in the network or somebody in your professional community, it's like, okay, we know that these are some companies that are actually safer spaces for us, or these are companies that are doing the right thing. Who do we know at those companies? Because there might be a great opportunity for me or for you there. You're 4 times more likely to get a job at a company if you know a single person there, just one person, and they don't have to be the CEO. And so get in your community, in your group chat, and say, okay, who do we know at those companies? And if we're somebody in our friendship group or in our professional network is going to work at a company, and we don't know a lot about it, don't let your friends go work at some place that you've had a horrible experience, right? And not tell them. And so get in the community and say, who do we know? Hey, I've got a job offer, or I'm thinking about a role here. Who do we know who's worked there? And so my network is so much bigger when I network with the two of you. It grows exponentially. And so I think that that part of that information sharing is that we're sometimes, because there's so much ego and shame tied up in career ascension and money and compensation, but we're so much smarter as a team than we are as an individual. And so I think that that's one of the best things that we should do, is to, one, build that community and build trust in that community, that we can say, oh, I didn't take the job, but here's a copy of my offer letter. So make sure that they're offering you what you're supposed to be getting, right?
Oh, that's
You need that
nice.
for that
Yes,
piece.
salary transparency. Yeah.
Salary transparency is a big deal. I tell it to women all the time, that you and whoever your girlfriends are, or your really good friends, get in that group chat and say, let's share offer letters. Let's take all of the ego and shame out of this and start talking about how much money we're making and what we're negotiating for and how we got it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Friends
think-
can be your blueprint.
Yeah, I think especially because we as queer people, oftentimes we grow up with this sense of we're not worthy. I'm not
Yeah.
worth it, right? And John and I have this conversation every time we pitch a company or look for a sponsor comes to us, and we ask ourselves, are we worthy of this? And then we need to remove that, right? And I think that that's really important for us, connecting with other people who have similar career paths, some similar job titles, or are at the point where we want to be. Being able to have those kind of conversations really does help remove. I don't want to say it's going to remove all of that that feeling of lack of self-worth, but it's going to help remove some of it, because if you're going to go in saying I deserve 70,000 and somebody else is like making $90,000 already, they're going to be like,
Yes.
okay, you don't want to undercut yourself. They're going to take advantage. They're going to hop on that right away because you've got the skills and all that. Don't let yourself be taken advantage of. And that means that we have to be a little vulnerable in sharing with others.
Because especially if you can be vulnerable with people that you're sort of building that community with, like you go so much further together on it. Because and this is the other thing too, is that that's some of the strategy pieces of it. It's like so much of the shit that I went through as a young Black gay man trying to figure out life in a marketing career at some of the biggest companies in the world. I went through that, I know, because I have a big mouth and I will tell all the girls, like, don't do that. Don't let them do this to you. Like, ask your girlfriend, like, how much money she's making. Like, I have a big mouth. I know that some of the stuff that I went through is so that I could be a testimony to some other young gay person so that they don't have to go through what I went through, right? And so I think that that's a big piece of it. The other piece of it is that mental health piece of why building that professional community and that professional network is, as a Black man, I have gotten in my group chat and said, hey, did they give me all of the interns from the HBCU because I'm Black? And my friends are like, absolutely they did. Do not let that like deter you. Here's what you have to do. And you're going to make sure that every one of those Black interns from those HBCUs have a great experience. They're going to learn a ton. You're not going to be pissed because they said, oh, let's put all the Black kids with the Black guy. You're going to rock it out. And so part of it too is getting in that space to where your professional community, the community of people will help you reframe your thinking on things. They will give you the opportunity to vent so that you don't have that stress level. They will say, boy, I went through the exact same thing, right?
It's okay. You can say bitch. We're all adults here.
They were like, I went through that exact same thing. Here's how you do that, right? And I don't want to oversell, but I also don't want to undersell that so much of what happens in our careers is that there's like a wall that we're outside of sometimes, and that we don't feel a part of that team. You got to build your own team so you can figure out how to break that wall down or go to a space that doesn't have that wall.
Right.
I always felt like when I was younger in like a lot of the firms and stuff, that I felt like there were things that I didn't get invited to. Like, and a friend of mine said to me, it's like, I don't know what to do with a single gay guy at a dinner party. It's like, I just don't know what to do with that. I know what to do with, I know how to put these people together, these couples together. I know how to put this single person. It's like, I don't know what to do with that. And I was like, oh, okay. You know what? I don't necessarily have to be at that dinner party, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I am building community of my own to where I know that there's somebody who does know what to do with the single gay guy at a dinner party, right?
Right.
And part of that, what we did with the guide was like, okay, here's how we want you to reimagine networking, and here's some tips on how to do that. But we also said, okay, that is one part of it. The other part is, how do we help LGBTQ plus folks identify companies that are safer spaces? And so one of the things that we did was like, we have this values matching filter. So you can literally filter out, like you can search for a job, click the values match and say, okay, one of my values is like, diversity inclusion is prioritized. And companies that actually have proven it and have like what their proof points are on their company pages and things like that, it will show you the jobs at those companies first. Right. And so we also said, okay, well, that's one way. Okay, we've got a technology tool for that. What are some other like culture cues? How do we tell LGBTQ plus folks to like, what are some of the culture cues that you can look for in companies that it may be a good cue that this may be a safer space? And we told them to look for culture cues like, and this is like statistically what we saw is that do the recruiters and senior leaders actually use their pronouns in their email signatures? That could be a really good culture cue. Do they have an employee resource group for LGBTQ plus folks? That's a really good culture cue. Are there any out leaders at the company that are that have identified as being out? It's pretty easy to see who company leaders are. Like, see if there's any evidence of that. Look to see like things like, are they participating in out leadership or out for undergrad, or are they participating in the Human Rights Campaign's Equality Index? Those sorts of things. You can also look to see where they're spending their lobbying dollars, right? Because
Oh, wow, really?
yeah, you can't look at it, you can't find it on LinkedIn, but you can absolutely search for it online. Like, it's a great culture cue, right? That I oftentimes say to people. I used to do I took a year off from corporate America a little while ago, and it was great for me. And one of the things I consulted on was like, sort of diversity efforts. And I was talking to this company, and they'd already paid my retainer. So I was really honest with them, which they were paying me to do anyway. But I was like, you cannot do a multi-million-dollar sort of, advocacy campaign where you're handing out bottles of water to Black people, and the Black people who work inside the company are on fire, right? I was like, your values outside the company and your values inside the company, they have to match, or people will see that, right? And so like part of what we were doing was like helping queer professionals sort of like look at what those cues are, and then so that they can make a better decision. What we were thinking is, we just want people to be out, proud, and paid. Right? Like, we want you to be able to, we are just as ambitious as our heterosexual cisgender counterparts. We don't want to just put our heads down and take whatever is given. I want it all. Right?
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I want it all for my career and my budding family, just as much as anybody else wants it for their career. And even when my family was me and my golden retriever needed to get paid, right?
Right.
And
Right.
and so my family is a little bigger now, but that's what I mean by that. We have this, just because our families don't look like what people are used to seeing families look like, does not mean that our family does not have to eat, and eat well,
Right.
and be paid equitably, right? So,
Yes, it's funny that you mentioned your golden retriever. One of our pushbacks on financial services firms is that we're tired of all of the collateral that they distribute to be a straight white couple walking down the beach with their golden retriever. Because that's not what
Listen,
retirement looks like for all of us.
it is not. But listen, it's probably that golden retriever was probably evidence of the level of code switching that I probably was doing at that point in my life. But I mean, listen, I was working in PR and communications at that particular time, and PR is overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly women, and one of these things does not look like the others, right? For your listeners, I'm a big Black guy with a strong Southern accent, and most of the PR professionals that I was working with were coastal. They were LA and New York. And so even with that dichotomy, there was still so much of the need, for some reason, when you're younger and you don't have examples, or nobody gives you permission to be authentic, or gives you a blueprint to be authentic, that you feel like, I've got to be and look like everybody else
Right.
to survive in this or to be liked, right?
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And it's tough. And I get it. I get why it's tough.
Absolutely. So how can our listeners and viewers access the Out at Work guide that you created in collaboration with Impact Media?
I love Impact Media, and they're such a cool young, vibrant. They've got they've got all these followers on social. They got 2 million Instagram followers, and 15 million people come to the site every week. And we put if you are on LinkedIn, this is not a commercial.
I don't know who's not really at this point. I mean, it's not like it's Facebook or Instagram where you pick your preference. It's like everybody's on LinkedIn if you have a job.
Yeah, if you are on LinkedIn, you can follow me, Andrew McCaskill, AndrewMccaskill, and in my bi-monthly, most every 2-week newsletter. It's called The Black Guy in Marketing. It is not just about being Black or about being in marketing. It's about helping people from underrepresented groups get career advice and information. And it speaks to what it was like for me early in my career, but I also bring in and interview people and interview guests for the newsletter. And we have a link to the guide there in the newsletter. We also have a link to the guide in the LinkedIn newsroom. We have a link to the guide in the LinkedIn press room. And hopefully, if there's an opportunity for show notes for this, we would love to send you a link to the guide for that as well.
We will definitely.
There will be, and our newsletter subscribers will get that link as well. But I have to laugh because I always get bi and semi-monthly confused as well. I'm not sure which it is.
I was gonna try, but I was like, no way, Jose.
They're different, apparently. I never get it straight.
Right.
Like I'm already struggling to sound smart with YouTube.
It doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like it. So a question we've been asking all of our guests lately, because of the general anxiety in the country, especially for LGBTQ plus folks, and I would imagine for people of color as well. What is one thing, related or unrelated to today's discussion, that has you feeling really good these days?
Oh, what's one thing that's having me feeling really good? I think one of the things that does have me feeling really good is I feel like younger gay people are not here for the bullshit the way I was here for the bullshit, right? And that gives me a lot of hope and a lot of joy. I think that we're going to see so many young LGBTQ plus folks tell companies that their behavior is unacceptable. They're not. Some of them are going to stay in those organizations and fight to make them better. Some are going to grab their pocketbooks and go out the door and find places where they can thrive and they don't have to fight as hard. But I think that there's such a diversity of awareness for that I see in a lot of young queer people, particularly at work, that they're just not going to put their head down and just and survive. We want to thrive at work. And that was the thing that I wanted to talk to the team so much about, is how do we get from talking about surviving to talking about thriving? And that's what we want. Like, we want people to have control over their careers and not feel like the career is going to happen to them and they just have to take whatever they get. Like, we're going to talk to LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs next year, and we're going to talk to them about how to use the platform to support their business, but also how to use the platform to find other examples and blueprints for their businesses and things like that. Like, I'm excited for that. I also got married recently, so I'm really excited about that.
Oh, nice. Congratulations.
Yeah, so I'm still flying high from the post-wedding bliss of it all. So
Nice.
there's something about getting married that makes you feel like a super gay.
Yes.
I feel like I unlocked an additional Mario Kart point. Right? It's there's a gay crown that you get now. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's all other new things that come along with getting married and living with somebody for real.
Nice. Well, congratulations on that. And so our second to last question, unprepared. Can you explain that wall behind you, please?
Why, yes, I can. So I work in Atlanta. even though I feel like I live on a plane. One of the things that happened to me during COVID was I moved back to the South to help take care of my parents, and then just never left. And the wall behind me, can I move the camera to show it to you?
Sure, yeah.
Sure.
Oh, okay. All right. So the wall behind me says "Connect to Opportunity." I'm not doing a good job of
Nice.
holding it. I'm in a conference room at LinkedIn that is named for Morehouse College, which is my alma mater. Yes, I went to an all-male school for undergrad. Yes, everything that you think about all-male schools is true. And
I knew I should have
and
gone.
and behind me, there are these little tassels with the names of famous alums that went to school at Morehouse. Morehouse is in Atlanta, so all of our conference rooms are like iconic Atlanta spaces. And I love this conference room because, my alma mater, and it's really, really quiet in the middle because there's a lot of chatter going on outside. And I was like, this is probably the most quiet to do a podcast recording in the whole building.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I thought we were looking at tassels, but I wasn't entirely sure. And I knew I had to ask. So I figured if I had
Those
the
are
question,
tassels.
our viewers had these questions as well. Then lastly, how can our listeners and viewers connect with you and all things LinkedIn?
Oh, absolutely. Listen, if you're ever thinking about, hey, I want to do a skills assessment for free, or I want to think about what are the most in-demand skills right now that companies are hiring for, or, what are some of the top companies that are that are hiring for people from underrepresented groups and things like that. There's a ton of information that you can go to and find on opportunity.linkedin.com. You can go, you
Nice.
can play around with it, you can take a look at the skill. You can put in the skills that you have, and it'll spit out a ton of other jobs other than the one that you have today that you have
Wow.
at least 70% of the skills required for people who
Nice.
want to pivot and don't know how to. So you can
Nice.
go to opportunity.linkedin.com for that. If you want to follow me, I'm Andrew McCaskill on LinkedIn. I'm Drew McCaskill on Twitter. And do follow my newsletter. It is interesting. Even though my current one has gotten like 100 shares of people, and I was like, which is like a lot for 100 shares on platform. But I think it was because I was really annoyed at a comment that I heard. Someone said that people were going to come for black jobs, and I just really needed to understand what was a black job. So
Right.
I've been seeing a lot of that content on social media lately. There's some very what is it, passive aggressive videos I've seen.
Yeah.
I bet. And so I broke that down in a historical context, and a couple of people really liked it for the newsletter. It was a little bit of a departure, but but the newsletter is all about, you know, getting to more equitable outcomes for women, for people of color, for people from the LGBTQ plus community. Because we are not just here showing up at work every day to survive. We are showing up at work every day and bringing our brilliance and bringing our time and our talents, and we want to thrive just like everybody else. And I do believe that information and community and technology are the greatest tools to sort of move and sort of really amplify our careers forward.
I love that. We love your message. Thank you so much. Andrew McCaskill, thank you for a great interview today.
Oh, thank you so much. This was great.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank for details. Capital One, N.A., member FDIC.
Thank you, Andrew, for a fantastic interview and your insights. To our listeners and viewers, thank you again for joining us for another episode. Get your Queer Money takeaway and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as Andrew's contact information from this week's newsletter.
Then join us this Thursday when we cover part 2 of our 2-part series on why gays can't save for retirement. And then next Tuesday when we dive deeper into retirement planning for LGBTQ plus people. Thank you. Have a great week. And remember, stay fabulous.